Hey, welcome back, podcast friends. And today's episode, I want to talk about elimination diets. This is something that I've been getting questions asked about also. So I'm not going to totally explain each one of these elimination diets. I'm just going to kind of outline some of the highlights of them. So first, what is an elimination diet? Elimination diet is when you have issues, you have physical or mental issues that you hadn't had before, and all of a sudden they're coming on, and you're pretty sure that it has to do with some type of food that you're eating, but you really don't know what it is. This could be mental unclarity, it could be bloating, it could be hives, it could be all respiratory issues. All kinds of things can be happening because of the types of food that you eat. So what an elimination diet does is it's when you selectively pick just certain foods and you just eat those for a short period of time and just see what happens. See if this condition gets better or worse. And what you're trying to do is you're wanting to eliminate all the allergens and all the toxins that occur naturally in foods. And so everybody is kind of they're more sensitive to one than the other. And so by removing, the first thing you're going to remove is you're going to remove all the artificial ingredients. And if you're having any of these issues, which most people are, just by removing all these artificial flavor and artificial color and artificial sweeteners, all these artificial ingredients, they're just chemicals. So basically anything in a box, bottle, bag, or can, anything that's made by man should be eliminated. Because if you're looking at an ingredient label, what you're doing is you're reading all the chemicals that drug company or that food company put in that box or bag or bottle or can. So without a doubt, those are gone first. So we're talking about real food, real meat, real fruit, real vegetables. That's what you really should be having. So first get rid of all that stuff and just go to natural God-made food and stay away from man-made food. And that may clear up a lot of your things, your issues. But what you'll do is you're going to slowly eliminate these foods until you get down to a baseline of where you feel best about yourself. It's like you feel clear, you're not bloated, you've got energy, you just feel good. Once you get to that baseline, then you're going to slowly start adding these foods back until you find out who the culprit is. And what I mean by slowly is just you should have this food at least one meal a day for at least 1 week. And if you don't have any of those problems showing up, then pick the next food and then eat that at least 1 meal a day for at least a week and keep going until all of a sudden you start seeing the symptoms again. Then you can kind of pinpoint a little bit about what's causing all your issues and you can just get rid of that food. So that's basically what elimination diet is. So do these work? Do elimination diets work? Well, it all depends. And you'll know more what I mean by that by the end of this. But basically, a lot of these diets have to do with the bacteria that's in our gut. Remember, we have trillions of bacteria in our intestines, and with thousands of different species. Now, these bacteria in our gut help with everything. They help digest our food. They help produce the neurotransmitters, the chemicals for our brain, like dopamine and serotonin, are produced by there. They allow take a lot of the nutrients out of our food so they can be absorbed into our bloodstream and into our body so we can use them. So the bacteria in our gut are extremely important. However, you can change that type of bacteria by the types of food you eat. When you eat man-made ultra-processed food, you get one type of bacteria that lives in your food that lives off sugar. And those are the bacteria that are extremely harmful to your health. They ruin your intestinal lining. They cause things like leaky gut. All kinds of horrible issues occur when you eat carbohydrate-based foods, especially man-made food. When you start eating healthy food, you replenish those bad bacteria with good bacteria that can heal your gut. So that's why a lot of these things that you take that are causing all kinds of problems, once you heal your intestinal lining, you're not going to have those problems anymore. And this is a lot with people who are having gluten insensitivity. That's a lot why. Gluten usually stays in the intestinal lining until you eat that kind of food that makes bad bacteria, tears up your intestinal lining. And now this gluten was just a protein. It's a protein that's in wheat, barley, and rye. So if you stay away from wheat, barley, and rye, you don't have to worry about gluten. If you have celiac disease or gluten intolerance, stay away from carbohydrates, stay away from those plants, stay away from definitely wheat, barley, and rye, but you can't have any man-made food because they put that in everything. But anyway, so if you stick to just animal-based food, you will never have to worry about gluten ever, because there is no gluten in that. It's only in wheat, barley, and rye. So, but anyway, that being said, so first, all elimination diets, they all get rid of ultra processed foods, because everybody knows how toxic those are. No matter what the food companies try to tell you, they're toxic. So these elimination diets, what they do, you're trying to find your food sensitivities. So the other thing you have to worry about, some of these elimination diets, they don't take into effect the fact that some of the foods that we have actually have anti-nutrients in them, like I talked about in the last podcast, because these are things that are in plants, really things that are in plants that actually can inhibit nutrients from being absorbed into your body. So even though there's nutrients in the plant, there's also some of these toxins like tannins and oxalate crystals and lectins, these other things that are in plants. And I talked about that in the last episode, but that actually keep those nutrients from being absorbed, to where when you eat animal-based foods, all the nutrients that are in there are actually getting absorbed too, because they're already readily available. So much healthier when you stick to animal-based foods. But these things, they can decrease the absorption, they can decrease the nutrients that you get. And so these are things that you need to look for when you're doing your elimination diet. You're going to get rid of those. So some of the popular elimination diets, well, I'll just kind of go through them. One of them is the autoimmune paleo diet. And this one, it's like the paleo diet, but it's more strict. So besides just getting rid of all the sugar and high fructose corn syrup that like food companies put in there, it also gets rid of natural sugars, also like coconut, fruit, vegetables, some of these things that have natural sugars, it gets rid of those also. And when we talk about the toxins that are in these plants, I did a whole podcast episode 117, and that's what toxins are in plants. And that'll explain a lot of this about what these toxins are. And so that's something you have to think about when you're doing these elimination diets. So the autoimmune paleo diet, what they do is they still allow for seeds, and they allow for low glycemic vegetables. And I'll explain that in just a little bit. But seeds, remember seeds are like, whether you're talking about grains, nuts, or legumes, they're all seeds. So a grain is a seed that comes from like wheat, okay, from a plant like that. Nuts are actually, those are the ones that they're a seed that has one shell, like a walnut or an almond, okay? That's a seed. Now, if you have multiple seeds inside a shell, like a peanut, that's actually called a legume. And those actually aren't nuts. Those are beans. So if you've got multiple seeds in a pod, that's called a legume, and those are beans. Those aren't seeds. So peanuts are actually a legume. So peanuts are actually a bean. They're not a nut. But so some of these seeds, they cause issues inside your bodies also. And they get a lot of them. These have lectins and they have oxalate crystals. And I've talked in the past about oxalate crystals, because that one actually hit home to us. Because you're going to get oxalate crystals, and I've talked about in past podcasts. But when you look under a microscope, these oxalate crystals look like little shards of glass. And if you eat a little bit of it, your body can get rid of it. But when you're eating these vegetables all the time that have all these oxalate crystals, they can build up. And that's what happened to our son. And it actually caused oxalate crystals were dumping into his bladder and causing bleeding in his bladder. So, and we found this out because I started learning about oxalate crystals, and I knew that he was having a spinach and kale smoothie every day. So once I explained to him why that was not good and he needed to get rid of doing that, one, you never blend your fruits and vegetables. If you're going to eat fruits and vegetables, eat the whole fruit, eat the whole vegetable. Do not blend them. Don't do that, because of fiber, I did a whole talk on fiber also. As episode number 64, is fiber important for good nutrition? Basically, the answer is, if you eat a lot of plant food, yes, you need fiber, because plants don't stay in the GI tract very long. They do their damage. Some of it gets absorbed, but it doesn't stay in your intestines. So you have to have fiber with it, so it stays in the intestines a little bit longer. It can go down and it can help feed some of the bacteria that's in your gut. But if you eat mainly in animal-based foods, you don't need fiber, because animal-based foods automatically stay in your gut for longer periods of time and automatically feed your bacteria. But a lot of these things, they do have things like lectins and oxalate crystals. And when they do, this is things like we just said, spinach, kale, almonds, chard. Those are low levels, but they can accumulate in these lectins and these oxalates. But something like tubers, like potatoes, the root vegetables, the ones that grow underneath the ground, they can have a lot of these tannins and these lactates and oxalates in them. And also nightshades like tomatoes and eggplants. So these are going to be the things that you're going to kind of wean off and see if maybe your issues are coming back or your issues are leaving and you start to feel good again. And the best way to eat fruit, if you're going to eat fruits and vegetables, one, just eat small amounts. You don't need very much, and eat them seasonally. If they are not growing while you're eating them, then you shouldn't be eating them. So the example I use is, you should never be eating strawberries in the middle of January or December. Strawberries don't grow that way. And the way you'll know whether you're eating it seasonally or not is buy your food from a local farmer. If it's growing, they've got it out there. If it's not growing, they don't have it out there. So that's a very easy way to find out if you're eating these. That way you're not eating too much, because you should never eat all these all the time. Just like spinach. And I said this in the last podcast, we talked to a friend who was talking to his grandmother and asked if they ever ate spinach. And they said, yeah, we ate spinach about 2 weeks out of the year, because that's the only time that it grew. Okay, but now people are doing these smoothies, which are crazy, and they're eating them every day. And these oxalates can build up in the system and can cause issues like it did with our son. So eat seasonally when you do, and eat them. Do not drink them. So that's the autoimmune paleo diet. The next one is called FODMAP. If you've ever heard of FODMAP, that's F as in Frank. It's FODMAP. And what that stands for is fermented oligosaccharide, disaccharide, monosaccharides, and polysaccharides. Okay. A saccharide is a sugar. So FODMAP, what these are, and just so you know, sugars, what this stands for, the monosaccharides means that just the base sugar, just one. There's 3 monosaccharides. That's glucose, fructose, and galactose. Okay. Then there's disaccharides, which puts these two monosaccharides together to form a different sugar. And there's 3 of those. Your disaccharides, and all of these disaccharides, they all use glucose as one of the things, one of the ingredients. So sucrose, which is table sugar, like you would normally think of sugar, that's a combination of glucose and fructose. But then you also have lactose, like what's in milk. And that's a combination of glucose and then galactose. And then you have maltose. And maltose is a combination of 2 different units of glucose. So all 3 of your disaccharides, they all have glucose, and then they just add a different one of the monosaccharides in there. And so FODMAP is trying to get rid of all these. And then an oligosaccharide means you have 3 to 10 of these base units, and a polysaccharide says you have more than 10 of these base units. So that's a different. So basically, you're trying to get rid of all the sugars when you're doing the FODMAP, and you can do this by fermenting them. Now, this is an example like we were talking about peanuts. Okay, peanuts are very low on the FODMAP list. Okay, so usually what happens is the lower you are on the FODMAP list, the better the food is. The higher you are, the worse it is. So something that's low on the FODMAP would be like chives or unripe bananas or peanuts and kale. High on the FODMAP list would be garlic, onions, apples, asparagus. A lot of people have issues with those. However, just like we said, just because it's low on the FODMAP list doesn't mean that it doesn't cause any issues. And peanuts are a perfect example. Peanuts, like I said, which isn't actually a nut, it's actually a bean. It's a I've already gone through with that. Okay, but what is with the peanuts? Peanuts have lectins, and lectins I've talked about it when I talk about the toxins in plants. But peanuts have a lot of lectins, and they think that these have a lot to do with autoimmune disease, a lot of the autoimmune diseases that we have right now, and a lot of the digestive problems that we have right now, because it tears up the gut and decreases our nutrients. Peanuts also contain oxalates and phytic acid. And we have already talked about the oxalates, the little shards of glass that are in there. And remember, all these things are natural in plants because plants are trying to protect themselves. They don't have things like animals do to protect themselves. They don't have claws and teeth, and they can't run fast and have big muscles and everything. They don't have that. So all they can do is produce these toxins to keep animals from eating them. And that's what's going on. But now here we go eating them. And now these toxins can increase in our body and cause all kinds of trouble. So besides the oxalates and phytic acid that interferes with all the nutrient absorption, there's also a fungus called aspergillus. It's a mold, and a lot of peanuts have this aspergillus. And the mold, it's called aflatoxins. That's what it produces. And these aflatoxins that are produced by aspergillus, the mold that you get in peanuts, these aflatoxins are actually carcinogenic. Okay, they actually can cause cancer, and this is well known. And they also, when they do, they pass the intestinal line, they get over in the bloodstream, and now they also can cause autoimmune diseases. And this mold can get in there, and if you have any yeast in your gut, it can make the yeast actually grow, and you can start getting mold toxicity. Okay, so that's why most people say stay away from peanuts, especially if you're having any issues with any GI issues or autoimmune diseases. Peanuts are not what you want to use. That's a legume that you don't want to be eating. Okay, so that was FODMAP. The next one is the GAPS. It's GAPS. It's the gut and psychology syndrome diet. And this is another one. This is usually used for leaky gut. Remember, leaky gut is when you've changed the bacteria that's in your gut. It's different now because they're starting to feed babies all this man-made baby food, which is horrible also. But when you eat good, healthy food, a good, healthy animal-based food, you have good, healthy bacteria in your gut, which I've already said is responsible for so many good things. However, when you start eating all this ultra-processed man-made food and all this stuff, you actually replace the bacteria, the good bacteria in your gut that lives on animal-based product, and you start putting all this glucose or all these bacteria in your gut that live off sugar, because that's what carbohydrates are. That's what plant-based foods are. They're all the basic building block of sugar. And when you eat man-made products, it's all, I mean, they put sugar and these horrible seed oils and everything. So it totally changes the bacteria in your gut, and these bacteria, when they change, they can start releasing the stuff that actually causes deterioration in the lining of your gut. So your intestines, and this is what I've talked about in past podcasts, but your intestines, think of them like pantyhose. And so a lot of things can just go right through. But when you have this kind of bacteria that lives off sugar, if that's what's living in your gut, it can produce a substance that starts causing leaky gut. And it turns these pantyhose, these regular pantyhose, into more like fishnet stockings. So things that used to be able to stay in the gut, they don't stay in the intestines anymore. Now they can get over in your blood, and now you can start having all kinds of allergic reactions. Like when you're talking about people who have this celiac disease, things like that, because of all the gluten that's in there. Gluten never used to be getting into our bodies, and now it can, because of the leaky gut, because of the type of food we eat that's changed the different types of bacteria in our gut. So what you want to do with these, when you do the gut and psychology syndrome diet, and remember, they say in psychology, because remember, the neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, the neurotransmitters in our brain are actually produced from the gut bacteria. So if you have bad gut bacteria, you're also going to have bad neurotransmitters. So that's why the type of food you have has a lot to do with psychological disorders as well. So people on this, if they have fungal or bacterial overgrowth like Candida, they need to avoid fermented prebiotics. Now, the difference between prebiotics and probiotics. A probiotic is when you're actually giving yourself the bacteria, because you've already killed the bacteria, either because of the eating man-made food or eating some of these plants that can kill the bacteria. Or you can also do it when you take antibiotics, because antibiotics don't kill just the bad bugs. They kill the good bugs also. And so you can get when you do this, you can get this overgrowth of some of these more harmful bacteria. So that's a probiotic. You're actually giving the bacteria. You're only given, one or two different species. So it's nowhere near as good as eating a good animal-based diet, but at least it's something. Prebiotics are when you're giving your food to your gut bacteria to help your gut bacteria get better. So hopefully you're giving it some good food. However, there are some prebiotics that are fermented. And if these prebiotics are fermented, they can also go in there, and this can actually help you produce yeast that should never have been there. And it can actually facilitate bacterial overgrowth. It'll make the bacteria get even worse. So you have to really be careful with what you're doing with the prebiotics and probiotics. And again, the best thing to do is eat natural, eat real food, and especially animal-based food. And that can help a lot. The next one is glycemic index. This is something that some people use. And I've actually talked all about the glycemic index in episode 26. What is glycemic index and is it important? So you can go back to episode 26, but just to cut it down, just to break it down real quick, the glycemic index is an index that shows they've taken all these carbohydrates and they said, if I give you 50 grams of this carbohydrate, how much glucose, how long does the glucose stay in your body? So they give glucose just an arbitrary number of 100. So glucose is the base, and everything else is based off that. So they give 50 grams of glucose, then they'd watch and they'd see how high your blood glucose went, and then when it came back down, and they'd mark that. Then they'd give you 50 grams of like carrots, and then they'd mark your glucose, and they'd see how long it was up, and then when it came back down. Or they give you chips. You know, you get the feeling, but it's all 50-gram portions, and that's what makes the glycemic index kind of crazy. It kind of doesn't make any sense because you don't always eat 50 grams of something. So as an example, glycemic index of carrots is 50. So that means you're going to see about half of the amount of sugar rise that you would see if you just gave 50 grams of glucose. Tortilla chips also has a glycemic index of about 52. Okay. So as you look at the glycemic index, carrots and tortilla chips are about the same. Okay, so that would make people think, oh, good, I can have either one of these. Wrong. That's not correct at all. So that's when they found out, okay, that doesn't really work. So they came up with the glucose load. What the glucose load is, or the glycemic load is they use the glycemic index, but then they multiply this times the amount that you would actually eat in a meal. Because there's some things like tortilla chips that you actually would eat about 50 grams of chips in one setting. But when you look at carrots, when you eat carrots, you'd eat about 4 grams in a setting. Okay. So to get the glycemic load, you just take the glycemic index and then you multiply that times the actual grams of carbs that are in normal serving. So for tortilla chips, we said that had a glycemic index of 52. And you usually eat about 50 grams in a serving. So you take 52 times 50, then divide that by 100. Okay. When you do this, you come up with a glycemic load of 26 for tortilla chips. Now let's do the same thing with carrots. Again, remember their glycemic index was about the same. Carrots are about 50, but you only eat about 4 grams in a normal setting. So for the glycemic load, you take 50 times 4, then divide that by 100, and that equals 2. So even though their glycemic index was very similar, their glycemic load is totally different. Tortilla chips are 26, carrots are only 2. Okay. That helps, but it still doesn't tell you a lot of information. So by far, the best index to use is the insulin index, because really, we don't care your glucose, where your glucose level is totally dependent on how well your insulin works. Okay. Insulin is what you care about, not the glucose level. Glucose levels is a symptom. High insulin is what causes everything. You do not want high insulin levels. So insulin index does the same thing with a certain amount of food. You see what the insulin does with all this, and that's what you really are going to care about. And obviously, when you do this, you want to remove all the sugar, remove all high fructose corn syrup, and really, you don't realize how much sugar that they put in everything and how they've gotten you so addicted to sugar. And I've said back in 1965, it was estimated that we only ate about 2 teaspoons of sugar a day per person per day. Now in 2015, it was estimated that people are eating around 65 teaspoons of sugar per day because they put in everything. And that may sound crazy, but when you think there's 10 grams of sugar or 10 teaspoons of sugar just in one 12-ounce bottle of pop or Coke or whatever, soda pop, you are already, and think of how much soda pop people eat all day. And then all the chips and crackers and cookies and brownies and pizzas and all the crud bread, everything. We get way too much sugar in our diets. So anyway, that's the glycemic index. So the next one is the low histamine diet. This is another one a lot of people are on. Histamine is a natural chemical that your body actually releases, okay? And it's a response to some kind of an allergen that's gotten in your body. So your mast cells in your body, in your bloodstream, break down, they release histamine. What histamine does is it causes your blood vessel to dilate because it's trying to get rid of whatever this allergen is. So when you dilate your blood vessels, you could get more of your army cells and things in your blood that can try to get rid of that allergen. So you increase the blood vessels so you get more blood flow to the area. The other thing it does is this increases mucus secretions, because if you're inhaling allergies, you want it to stick in that mucus so you can either cough it up or blow it out in your nose. And that's why you have all that mucus. It's helping your body try to get rid of these toxins. So that's why you get the runny nose when you have some kind of an allergen. The other thing it does is it also increases your stomach acid. And again, if you eat something that your body doesn't like and it knows it's an allergen, if it can increase the stomach acid, it can help break down some of that, the bacteria, the viruses, or one of these toxins that are in the food that you eat. So that's what histamine does. That's why when you have a cold and you have runny nose and watery eyes and all this, you take an antihistamine. That's going to slow up your mucus production and your tearing and all that. So you kind of have to weigh it. Do you really want to dry up that mucus, or do you want to let it get rid of all these allergens? And it all depends on where you are, what kind of illness you have and what's going on at the time. But that's what histamine is. But a lot of people, they have allergens to foods, and so they have a large histamine reaction. And so they try to decrease the amount of histamine that's in there according to the types of food that you're going to eat. And the problem with that is a lot of these food allergies or these allergens, they're not necessarily in artificial products. You're going to get a lot of these allergens in actual fruits and vegetables. They actually can start affecting you. And some of these, and especially the ones that have these anti-nutrients like the tannins and lectins that we talked about, when they are in your GI tract, they bind to minerals like magnesium and zinc and iron, and make it to where it never gets absorbed into your body. So when it does, you're low on magnesium, you're low on zinc, you're low on iron because of the types of plants that you're eating that has these anti-nutrients in it. And some good examples are quinoa can do this, corn is horrible for this, and amaranth. These are all some, but there's a lot of other ones too. But those are just some examples of the types of foods that you can eat and that can actually cause you to have a histamine release. So the next one, traditional foods. Traditional foods is really, they focus more, not necessarily on what you're eating, but how you prepare the food that you're eating according to the way our ancestors did. So a problem with this is a lot of them, they allow raw vegetables and raw fruits. And this also could be a problem because some of these have a lot of fiber in it. And when you're eating that fiber, this can cause bloating, stomach cramps, passing gas. A lot of this is because you have too much fiber in your intestines. So what they recommend is doing things like cleaning, soaking, cooking, all these things, and try to get these and fermenting, trying to get some of these anti-nutrients out of the food. But even that, there's still plants that keep those anti-nutrients in them. And when you eat it, you start getting the effects of that. And then the last one I'll talk about is the Whole30 diet. Now, the Whole30 diet, it does get rid of all the ultra-processed food, but it also gets rid of all the processed ingredients as well. So this is good, and it limits some nuts. Some nuts it limits, but some nuts it still allows them in there. And same with the fruits and vegetables. The Whole30 diet allows all the fruits and vegetables you want, okay? Now, this, again, can be a problem. So some of the problem foods that you have with this, like spinach, like I talked about with my son with the oxalate crystals, and squash. Squash has a lot of lectins in it. So the Whole30 diet is eliminating some, but what all of these diets, what these all have in common, okay, even though they're elimination diets, they still contain all the fruits and all the vegetables. So the big question to ask yourself is, what if the real culprit is these plant-based foods? What if what's causing you all these issues are all these phytates, tannins, oxalates, cyanogenic glycosides, saponins, lectins, and enzyme inhibitors? Those are all toxins that are located in fruits and vegetables. And I talked all about this when I talked about what toxins are in food, and that was episode 117. But this is something you need to think about. So if you really do have a lot of GI distress, a lot of problems, arthritis, if you have an inflammation in your joints, if you're not thinking very clearly, there is a good possibility it's because of fruits and vegetables that you're eating just as much as it is all this man-made toxic crud that they put in the man-made food. So just be aware that plants are trying to kill you. Plants do not want you eating them. So they have things to protect them from you eating them. And there are things you can do when you cook it and ferment it, and different things you can do to decrease a lot of these poisons, these toxins. But still, some of these toxins are going to remain. And that's where the elimination diet comes in. So if I were you, if you're doing an elimination diet, I would try as hard as you could to get all the way back to just nothing but an animal-based nutrition. And then if you want some fruits and vegetables, slowly add those in. Again, at least 1 meal a day for at least a week, and see if you have any issues. If you don't, then you can add in another one. And hopefully you'll find out what works perfect for you, where you're clear of thought, you have a ton of energy, you feel great about yourself, you're at a good weight. That's what we want you. So you have a good quality health. That's what we want. So a good quality health leads a good quality life. So I hope this helped. Like I said, I've been getting asked a lot of questions about all these different elimination diets. So I thought I might as well just do a podcast on it. So as always, thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. And as always, make simple, healthy choices to live a quality life.